When it comes to skill checks, most game systems respond with a static pass or fail. Either you have a target number or you must roll under a certain percentage. Either way, you simply pass or fail. But one of the most unique systems I've ever come across is Genesys, because it uses something called narrative dice to provide a wide variety of responses to a skill check. Welcome, Traveler. I'm Nick, and today we're going to go over the basics of the Genesys system. The goal of this video is to give you an idea of how narrative dice work. Mind you, this brief explanation won't be enough to replace the actual Genesys book, so whether you want to get an idea for your own games or if you're interested in my shows, take a seat and relax as we dive into Genesys. The interesting thing about rolling narrative dice is that a successful roll may still yield negative results. On the other hand, a failed roll may still yield positive results. The system goes beyond a pass or fail, and takes a look at the consequences of your skill check. For example, imagine firing a gun. In most games, if you miss, you miss. The bullet doesn't hit its intended target. But in Genesys, that missed shot could have deeper consequences. The bullet could ricochet. Maybe it hit another enemy, or maybe an ally. Hell, the bullet could have just missed. But the variety of responses could change the scene in a plethora of ways. While the details of those consequences are determined by the players, the narrative dice decides if those consequences are negative or positive. Now, negative dice are shaped like standard polyhedral dice, but they have special symbols instead of numbers. One could use a set of standard polyhedral dice, but translating the numbers into the game's symbols would slow play down. That being said, Genesys is played using a combination of 6 dice in 2 categories: positive dice and negative dice. The 3 positive dice are boost, ability, and proficiency. Negative dice include setback, difficulty, and challenge. You'll find that each die has an opposite in the other category. Let's take a deeper look at them. Starting with boost and setback dice, we find them shaped like standard d6s. They're arguably the backbone of Genesys. These dice determine side effects of a skill check, both positive and negative, and they're conditional, meant to dynamically represent changing situations. Neither are tied to character stats. Boost die are blue. They are positive and meant to represent some sort of advantage, something like proper equipment, ample time, prior knowledge, or even a suitable environment. You'd get a boost die for sneaking in a low-light condition, or swimming with swim fins. Opposite that are setback die. These are black in color and rather negative. They represent poor conditions, such as the lack of proper equipment, less time, ignorance, or an adverse environment. You'd get a setback die for sneaking over snow. The crunch would give you away, or swimming upstream where the current flows against you. Every encounter produces dozens of reasons to include multiple of either die, and my examples are the shallowest of them, but these dice are hardly rolled alone. I have no idea why I keep defaulting into that, generic evil spooky narration voice. I'm having a very hard time controlling my tone in this because I keep speaking higher as well. Alright, let's give this a try at a normal talking tone. Next up are ability and difficulty dice. Both are shaped like your standard D8. Ability dice are green. They're used to represent someone's main characteristics and their skills. So, for example, they are tied to things like charisma, strength, and intelligence, while also portraying skills like persuasion, brawl, and knowledge. Difficulty die are purple, and as their name suggests, they represent the difficulty of a task. They're not tied to any stats. The GM simply calls out the difficulty of a check, though some checks have predetermined difficulties. Essentially, the more difficulty die, the harder the skill check. Finally, we have proficiency and challenge dice, shaped like a standard D12. These are the strongest and most severe dice. Typically, they're an upgraded form of the ability or difficulty dice. Painted yellow, proficiency dice represent a character's specialization. I'll explain them a little further when we build a dice pool. Challenge die are dark red. They symbolize only the most extreme difficulties and are an upgraded form of difficulty die. Again, they aren't tied to any stats. You simply use them to add another layer of difficulty. Now, knowing the dice by name is all good and well, but you'll need to know their symbols to actually play the game. And there are 6 of them, not counting blank faces. Dice that roll blank-faced are ignored. The others, however, directly alter the game, and much like the dice they're painted on, these symbols directly oppose each other. The first 2 we're looking at are success and failure symbols. Frankly, the more success symbols you have, the more likely you are to succeed. Yeah, I know. Shocker, right? These are the symbols that determine whether a skill check passes or fails. They're shaped like stars, or gunshot wounds, and are found on boost, ability, and proficiency die. Failure symbols actually oppose success symbols. Failure symbols look like X's, and the more of them you have, the more likely you are to fail the check. Failure symbols are found on setback, difficulty, and challenge die. When determining whether a check is successful or not, these 2 symbols battle it out. Every failure symbol cancels out one success symbol. A skill check succeeds only if at least one success symbol remains. The second set of symbols are advantage and threat symbols. They have no say in a skill check passing or failing, but they determine the side effects of that skill check. Remember that a successful skill check can still have negative effects, and a failed skill check can still have positive effects. The advantage symbol looks like an upward pointing arrow and represents some sort of positive side effect. They can be found on boost, ability, and proficiency dice. The threat symbol looks like crosshairs on a circle and represents some sort of negative side effect. They're found on setback, difficulty, and challenge dice. Working like the previous symbols, each threat symbol cancels out one advantage symbol. The aspect of a side effect is determined by which symbol type remains. The greater the amount, the greater the advantage or consequence. They can also be used as currency on this table to produce specific outcomes. On certain dice, these symbols come in pairs. Other times they come alongside a success or failure symbol. Finally, we'll look at triumph and despair symbols. Think of them like standard critical success or critical failures. They're a form of super threat or super advantage. And like prior symbols, they can act as a type of currency, triggering special effects on items or weaponry, or even just dealing standard critical hits. Know that both of these symbols can be used in place of multiple advantage or threat symbols. The triumph symbol looks like a success symbol, except that it's encased in a circle. Rolling 1 counts as both a normal success and a triumph. It's not either or, you'd receive both benefits. That being said, a standard failure symbol can cancel out the success portion of a triumph symbol, but not the triumph portion of it. The triumph symbol appears only on proficiency dice. Now, despair symbols look like circled failure symbols, and like triumph, despair counts as both a failure symbol and a despair symbol. Note that while the failure symbol can cancel out a success symbol, the despair portion cannot cancel out the positive effects of a triumph symbol. You'd receive both a critical success and critical failure. Despair symbols can only appear on challenge dice. Now that you have an idea of the narrative dice and how they're rolled, let me explain how to build a dice pool. The player needs to know 3 things to make a dice pool: a character's ability, the difficulty of a check, and the character's current situation. These things can be decided in any order. First, we'll look at character ability. As mentioned earlier, characteristics and skills are tied to ability dice. So consider this. Say Andrea needs to make a persuasion check. Her presence, the main characteristic, is a 2. She receives 2 ability dice. Her persuasion, the skill, is a 3, so she receives 3 ability dice. Lined up like this, you can see that 2 of these dice overlap. Any overlapping ability dice are upgraded to proficiency dice. This combination represents a character's natural talent mixed in with their training. All skills featured in Genesys have a main characteristic tied to them. But for now, character ability has been decided. Next, we look at skill check difficulty. Difficulty dice are directly tied to the difficulty of a skill check. The more difficulty dice, the harder the skill check. These aren't really tied to anyone's statistics, though they can be. Otherwise, Genesys has a handy breakdown for the difficulty of these skill checks. They range from 1 to 5 difficulty dice. For added difficulty, a difficulty die can be upgraded to a challenge die. Lastly, boost and setback dice are added. Players can take several things into considerations when adding them: environment, gear, timing, stuff like that. But don't avoid adding setback dice. Yes, it could worsen the skill check, but that's part of the fun. Back to the persuasion check. Maybe appearance could play a hand in it. Say the character is well dressed and well spoken, so she gets 2 boost die. But she's talking with scum of the underworld, and this scum thinks she's overdressed, so 1 setback die can be added. And maybe it's raining, so the suit is wet. Let's add another setback die. Now bring it all together. The dice are rolled. Remember, for the skill check to succeed, at least 1 success symbol must remain, after the others are cancelled out by failure symbols. The same is true for advantage and threat. But that's all I have for you, for now. Hopefully I explained narrative dice well enough. I'll be using the Genesys system in a few upcoming roleplays. Hope to see you there. Until then, I'll be in other worlds.